unstable now, that's what the experts say. They say a meltdown's possible, but it's safe enough to stay. Well, this kind of stability ain't safe enough for me. I'm gonna pack up all I can and move my family. No nuke blues, no nuke blues, no nuke news, no nuke news, no nuke blues, no nuke blues, no nuke news, no nuke news. It's time to choose, refuse to lose.
Hello everybody, welcome if you just got here. I'm Bob Meola from the Berkeley Peace and Justice Commission, and first I want to introduce our first speaker, Jackie Cabasso, the Executive Director of Western States Legal Foundation and a member of Nuclear Free California.
Hello. So though I'm better known for my nuclear weapons abolition advocacy, I got my start working against nuclear power. In 1976, I went door to door collecting signatures on the Nuclear Safeguards Ballot Initiative, which passed, prohibiting the construction of any new nuclear power plants in California until a permanent solution can be found to the problem of safe disposition of highly radioactive spent nuclear fuel. That problem is no closer to being solved than it was in 1976, and fortunately that law is still on the books. Now, in the aftermath of the continuing nuclear disaster at Fukushima, it's time to take the next step. In fact, it's urgent. It's time to shut down and decommission California's aging, leaking Diablo Canyon and San Onfore nuclear power plants before the inevitable earthquakes strike, and replace them with clean, renewable, decentralized, non-nuclear, non-fossil sources of energy. Western States Legal Foundation got its start way back in 1982, providing legal representation for nonviolent activists arrested protesting construction of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. I was arrested there myself a number of times. In the early 1980s, Western States, as part of the anti-nuclear movement in California, shifted its focus from Diablo Canyon to the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory and from nuclear power to nuclear weapons. Over the years, Western States has increasingly sought to link nuclear disarmament with global and domestic issues of peace, justice, and sustainability. With Fukushima, we've come full circle. In May of last year, 2 months after the beginning of the ongoing Fukushima nightmare, I was at the United Nations in New York with a small group of Japanese atomic bomb survivors. One of them commented, in 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Japan. Now we've done it to ourselves. There is nothing good about nuclear power.
Nothing.
Nothing. I'll say it again, there's nothing good about nuclear power. In addition to the certainty of catastrophic accidents and the resulting massive releases of radiation that do not respect city, state, or national boundaries, there are routine emissions at every step of the nuclear fuel chain, from mining, milling, and enrichment of uranium, to fabrication of nuclear fuel, to routine operation of nuclear power plants, to storage of spent fuel. These releases always endanger public health and safety. In addition, at both the front and back ends of the process, nuclear materials can be diverted to make nuclear weapons. Nuclear power powers the bomb. Moreover, nuclear power is incredibly expensive and capital-intensive and highly centralized. Nuclear power plants take years to build and have a limited energy production timeline. The dangers associated with producing and processing nuclear materials and the extremely sensitive nature of these materials due to their inherently dual-use capacity necessitate a level of secrecy and security that is fundamentally anti-democratic. Nuclear power benefits the infamous 1% who know that it's such a bad economic gamble that they won't even consider building new plants without federal loan guarantees and a Price-Anderson Act that caps a utility's liability for an accident at $10.8 billion. And there's no way to safely dispose of or sequester from living things in the environment the highly radioactive spent fuel that remains deadly for more than 100,000 years, the same number of years that the human species as we know it is believed to have existed. The U.S. has an estimated 77,000 tons of such high-level radioactive waste, and the amount increases every day a nuclear power plant operates. Nuclear power is not a solution to global warming. While it's true that the fission of enriched uranium in a nuclear reactor to generate energy produces no carbon emissions, every other step required to produce nuclear energy releases carbon into the atmosphere. Finally, nuclear technology has come to be viewed by the international community as the currency of technological modernity. And while the nuclear power and nuclear weapons infrastructures in the United States are for the most part separate, this is not necessarily true in potential aspiring nuclear weapon states. And over the long term, that includes every country with nuclear power. We must do our part to delegitimize nuclear power and nuclear weapons and make renewable, sustainable energy the new gold standard. We don't need nuclear power. We don't need it in California or the rest of the world. A landmark report published last spring by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the United Nations body of the world's leading climate change scientists, concluded that renewable energy could account for almost 80% of the world's energy support within 4 decades, if governments apply themselves, if there is the political will. That's our job, to create the political will. The United Nations has declared 2012 the International Year of Sustainable Energy for All, with the goal of supporting universal energy access by 2030. This comes in recognition of the fact that hundreds of millions of people, especially in rural areas, do not have access to affordable, reliable, and clean sources of energy. A new report by the International Renewable Energy Agency has found that energy access through renewable energy technologies can generate significant employment. Reaching the objectives of sustainable energy for all could create almost 4 million direct jobs by 2030 in the off-grid electricity sector alone. As my Japanese colleague Akira Kawasaki wrote in a recent commentary, quote, "To summarize, the lessons learned from Fukushima for the world's energy future are as follows. The energy system symbolized by nuclear power generation not only has high risks regarding safety, it is also centrally monopolized and prone to wasteful spending. It is necessary to establish a system with local community participation and ownership, built upon renewable energy sources founded on traditional wisdom. It is these responsible, sustainable policies which will provide security and accessibility for future generations. Excuses of lack of sufficient technology are no longer relevant, and such a crucial policy shift is indeed possible with sufficient political will. What happens in California has ripple effects across the country and around the world. California has an opportunity to lead by example by renouncing nuclear power and making a shift to clean, renewable, and sustainable energy. That's why it's important and right that the Berkeley City Council tonight adopts the resolution to decommission California's nuclear power plants and transition to green, non-nuclear generation sources. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. I want to say thank you to 2 unsung heroes, Roger Heride of the Abalone Alliance Clearinghouse and Donna Warnock, who have done so much to make this a good night. Thanks. And some good news is that on Sunday, 73 Japanese mayors, former and current mayors of cities in Japan, were out demonstrating to shut nuclear power down permanently in Japan. In the 70s, when the anti-nuclear movement was doing so much to stop these plants, we didn't know how lucky we would be at this point that accidents haven't happened, and we didn't know that without government subsidies, they couldn't have been operating all this time, because you could buy energy cheaper on the open market than you could but for the government subsidies. And we didn't know that a disaster would cost $720 million if it happened, and the Price-Anderson Act only allows $12.5 billion insurance. I hope I said $720 billion. Okay, so I didn't plan to say any of that. The resolution to decommission California nuclear power plants and transition to green non-nuclear power sources was passed by the Peace and Justice Commission prior to the shutting down of San Onofre due to safety concerns stemming from the malfunctioning of the plant's steam generating tubing in January. It calls on Governor Jerry Brown to exercise his powers to direct the California Public Utilities Commission to call for replacing reactors with clean and renewable energy generation by the end of the current licenses of California's nuclear power plants at Diablo Canyon and at San Onofre, thereby sending a clear signal to Pacific Gas and Electric Company and Southern California Edison that the state of California intends to use its jurisdiction to protect its economy and the reliability of its energy sources. The direction of the resolution towards state agencies is premised on the economic and reliability issues posed by these plants, as the safety issues are in the jurisdiction of the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The resolution also urges President Obama and the NRC to reverse their support of nuclear power, stop loan guarantees to the nuclear energy industry, shut down nuclear facilities operating in seismically active areas of the United States, establish a moratorium on building new nuclear reactors, and invest in clean renewable energy. It insists that the NRC withhold license renewal for Diablo Canyon and San Onofre nuclear power plants until seismic issues and off-site permanent storage are resolved. We know those issues will never be resolved. The resolution comes at a time when San Onofre is still shut down due to its malfunctioning, and a U.S. appeals court in New York has said that the NRC cannot license or relicense any nuclear power plant until it examines the dangers and consequences of long-term on-site storage of nuclear waste. No one commissioned offshore seismic studies before Diablo Canyon was licensed. PG&E Chairman Frederick Mielke said that, quote, experts we dealt with did not think that any further analysis offshore was necessary beyond what had been done onshore. One reason the company did not look offshore was disclosed in a memo by PG&E's chief geologist, who decided to forego further seismic studies because of the, quote, risk of uncovering geologic structures which could lead to additional speculation and possibly delay the plant, like the earthquake faults that have been found within a couple of miles there since. Diablo Canyon has a history of serious design errors, over 3,000 design and construction flaws. The NRC admitted to falsified documents regarding Diablo Canyon's construction, design, and safety violations. None of the speakers here today have enough time to explain everything that is wrong with nuclear power, but you will hear enough to convince you that we need to put an end to it. Europe is decommissioning 150 nuclear power plants. Former Prime Minister of Japan, Naoto Kan, recently said that he wants Japan to discard nuclear power and that the Fukushima incident had pushed Japan to the brink of national collapse. We have seen over the last few decades that many plants have had design flaws and construction flaws and errors. Seismic studies have purposely not been done when the utility companies knew there was reason to do them. There have never been responsible and realistic evacuation plans because they are impossible to implement. They're not real. San Onofre has a 10-mile evacuation zone, yet the United States said that there needed to be a 50-mile evacuation zone in Japan. The nuclear industry is built on fraud, lies, deception, ineptness, greed, and a lack of concern for human and other life on this planet.
That's right.
It has a history of cutting corners at the expense of the welfare of the public. It is time to permanently scrap nuclear power. The cities of San Clemente, Irvine, Laguna Beach, and other coastal towns in Southern California are calling for not relicensing, decommissioning, or not restarting San Onofre due to safety and economic concerns. And we're talking about some Republican city councils and mayors. The Ventura County Democratic Party wants to phase out nuclear power. The town of Fairfax wants to shut down San Onofre and Diablo Canyon permanently. In light of all this, the Berkeley City Council should urge Governor Brown to not let San Onofre ever start up again and to shut Diablo Canyon as soon as possible. It is too risky to let it run until its license expires. We know too much. To combat the risks of pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases, people practice safe sex. Why aren't we demanding that our state practice safe energy policies to combat the risk of nuclear annihilation? No nukes. Jackie?
So it's my pleasure now to introduce a prominent Berkeley citizen, an icon, you might say, my friend Joanna Macy, who I think is known to you all. Come on up, Joanna. Joanna is an eco-philosopher, a scholar of Buddhism, general systems theory, and deep ecology. A respected voice in the movements for peace, justice, and ecology, she interweaves her scholarship with 5 decades of activism, and she has been actively advocating for the elimination of nuclear power since the early 1970s. Please welcome Joanna Macy.
We just got a lot of information about why the Berkeley City Council should vote to decommission these 2 reactors of ours. It is a beautiful moment of choice. Actually, from the point of view of eco-philosophers and systems thinkers and Buddhist teachers, choice is what the thing that makes us human. It's where you find out who you are. It's at that moment when you say yes or no, when you ignite your will for something and choose where you're going to stand. And this is a beautiful moment of choice right now facing this council, and it's a choice that we who are gathered here, you guys, over and over again, you come out to see that this poison fire can be stopped being made. So so the choice that's facing us now is whether we can no longer be hostage to earthquakes, earthquake faults, human error, technological breakdown that could contaminate this beautiful state of ours for thousands of years. And our bodies, and our children's bodies, and our brother-sister species. This is the choice that, if it isn't made tonight here at the City Council, we are going to be seeing that it's made again and again, and it is being made across the country and around the world. But what can happen now? That point of choice is so vivid for us, because tragically we have seen what it started, how it began, and how it unfolds for the last 15 months in Fukushima. We have seen through the reports, and we are hanging breathless while wondering at rickety fuel storage, spent fuel rods up there open to the elements in a containment that could fall with an earthquake igniting. We have also discovered something else in this time. In addition to seeing what it can do to a rich and noble, intelligent and highly organized country of Japan, we have seen what nuclear power can do to our own government. We are not being told about the fallout, the radioactivity in our water, in our milk, in our air. And you know that it's falling on us. And those readings have been stopped. And we are not receiving health advisories. That is the job of our government, to tell us how we can protect our children, our families. This is a moral lapse, a degradation of our own leaders that can tie directly to what happens when you get in bed with nuclear power. But we're wising up. And as we stand here tonight, I want to just evoke for you who you're in solidarity with across the planet. Just east of here, a few thousand miles, there's a shut-it-downers around Vermont Yankee. And just in that way, and that those doughty New Englanders and the town are determined to shut down Pilgrim, which, like Diablo Canyon, is a Fukushima look-alike with its Mark I GE reactor, and 9 towns around there have voted for the decommissioning. And let's just move a little bit farther on around the planet. Let's go over to Finland. Do you know that they're turning out in masses of them at a blockade camp at the reactor of Olkiluoto in Finland? They want to close it down. And head down a little bit to the south, and you know what's there on the southern tip of India. 7,000 people, villagers, determined that the reactor of Kudankulam will not go online. And they are being arrested, and they are being starved out. And those coming now, they're not discouraged by the police brutality, and they have offered up their voter ID cards, saying, oh, listen to this, saying, we have surrendered our freedom and democratic rights at the altar of a few hundred megawatts of destructive nuclear power and no more. Yes. And come around the planet, and you're with your brothers and sisters in Jeju Island off the tip of South Korea. And they've begun already the blasting of the rock that's going to be bringing in nuclear-laden ships just 100 miles, most provocative action from the Chinese mainland. And then a little bit farther on, there we are. There we are with the people of Fukushima, with our Japanese brothers and sisters, feeling so many of them trapped. And they are not giving up. And they are calling on us to feel one with them, and we do. And it makes me think of a great Japanese figure, somewhat mythical, the Bodhisattva Kshitigarbha, also called Jizo. Well, when the Buddha was worrying about whether there'd be a Dharma around for the future generations, thousands of years in the future, that Bodhisattva, little guy, a monk, interestingly enough, a hermaphroditic monk, but in the scriptures, and Jizo made a great vow. And he says, I vow that the generations of the future will not be without the Dharma. I will vow that I will be there for them. And so we can make it this beautiful choice, and I think we're making that choice. We are going to hang in there for the sake of the future ones. We will not be remembered. We don't want to be remembered as that generation that poisoned this planet for all generations to come. No, we won't.
Thank you, Joanna. I'd like to introduce you to Dan Hirsch. Dan is a lecturer on nuclear policy at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and the former director of the program on nuclear policy there. He's also the president of the Committee to Bridge the Gap, a nuclear policy organization. Dan? And when I first started doing no nuke stuff in 1977, Dan had been already doing it. That's when I met him back then.
From the beginning of human life on this planet until December 2nd, 1942, all energy that we use came from the sun. And then beneath the soccer field stadium seats at the University of Chicago, we were able to tap the power of the atom. And that date, December 2nd, 1942, a day that will live in infamy, began the nuclear era. And just a few years later, that technology that was invented and used was then used to destroy first the city of Hiroshima and then the city of Nagasaki. In the case of Nagasaki, a bomb the size, with a plutonium sphere the size of a grapefruit, containing about 6 kilograms of plutonium, was able to destroy that city in an instant. The amount of mass that was converted into energy was about a third of the mass of a penny. At Diablo Canyon, south of here, and at San Onofre, every year, each of those two plants produces enough plutonium for about 100 nuclear weapons. Year after year, every time you turn on the light switch and pay your bill to PG&E or Edison, you are contributing to the production of plutonium with a half-life of 24,000 years that can be used for destruction of cities in measure beyond anything you can conceive of. These reactors are dangerous for numerous reasons. They proliferate nuclear weapons, they produce high-level radioactive waste, they produce maybe 50 years of power, but 500,000 years of radioactive waste. They are targets for terrorists. A terrorist group aiming at a nuclear reactor has, in essence, an unofficial form of a nuclear weapon provided to them. Using conventional explosives, they can release 1,000 times the long-lived radioactivity of the Hiroshima weapon. Each reactor at San Onofre, each reactor at Diablo Canyon has 1,000 times the long-lived radioactivity of the Hiroshima bomb. Each of the spent fuel pools, the pools that store the radioactive waste that's been taken out of the reactors, contains maybe 10 times that much, 10 Chernobyls worth. If that radioactivity were released, you could wipe out most of a substantial portion of California for generations. And the only thing that prevents that radioactive material from getting out is if the coolant keeps operating. And as we've seen at Fukushima, you can have an earthquake larger than they designed the reactor for, you can lose your cooling, your backup diesel generators can fail, and you can have a release of radioactivity on a scale that no one can really imagine. Let me give you a couple numbers. When a reactor is operating, it produces has in it about 15 billion curies of radioactivity. We measure permissible concentrations in millionths of a millionth of a curie. There is enough radioactivity in just one of the San Onofre reactors that, according to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, if there were a meltdown, it could produce 130,000 immediate deaths of the Hiroshima or Nagasaki type of acute radiation syndrome, 300,000 cancers, and 600,000 genetic effects, about 1 million casualties, if one of those reactors has a release. And all that prevents that release is the constant cooling. And that requires human beings to behave appropriately. So let me tell you about the human beings who operate the reactors in this state. I came back today from a meeting yesterday for the San Onofre nuclear reactors. And let me tell you a little history about those reactors for a moment. It's really quite extraordinary. It was revealed recently that for 5 years, the hourly fire watches were not conducted at San Onofre. The fire watch logs were fabricated. Instead of doing the hourly fire watches, they just recorded on the watch log that they had, even though they hadn't. And San Onofre did not even discover that for 5 years. Why did they have to do hourly fire watches? Because for 30 years, they had failed to fix fire safety problems and had told the NRC, give us another year, give us another 2 years, and as a temporary measure, we'll do hourly fire watches, which in the end they didn't do. For 4 years, the batteries that were supposed to be attached to the backup diesel generators to cool the reactor in case you lose off-site power weren't appropriately connected for 4 years. A few weeks ago, it was discovered that the backup diesel generators had automatic shutoff devices that are triggered by vibration. And after being in their reactor for 30 years, someone finally asked, aren't there vibrations in earthquakes? If we have an earthquake that causes us to lose our off-site power and we need the backup diesels, the earthquake will shut down the very device that they need to prevent the meltdown. It's just absolutely extraordinary. And you should know a couple things about San Onofre. It is #1 in the country for safety complaints. Last year, it was #1. The year before, it was #1. The year before that, it was #1. And that's because the NRC says there's a chilling environment, chilling atmosphere at the reactor in which the employees are too frightened to bring forth safety complaints. So the largest number of safety complaints to the NRC in the country, some years they are 10 times the national average. Why is that important? If workers cannot feel free to bring their complaints forward, safety problems get swept under the rug. And those safety problems can cause a meltdown that can take out a large part of the state. What about Diablo Canyon? Diablo Canyon, as many of you remember, there was supposed to be a license hearing in 1969 or 70. And the local group wanted to put on evidence of an offshore earthquake fault. And the NRC, Atomic Energy Commission at the time, refused to allow it. And so they built the reactor. And a few years later, they discovered a massive offshore earthquake fault caused the Ellsberg fault. It caused them to have to retrofit the entire reactor. The cost increased tenfold, cost you pay for it. And then it was discovered that when they did the retrofit, they put all of the pipe supports and whip restraints in exactly the wrong locations because they had built the two reactors to mirror image blueprints of each other and had ended up putting the pipe supports and whip restraints in the places where they didn't belong because they were using the other reactors' blueprints. For 4 years recently, key parts of the emergency core cooling system of the Diablo Canyon reactors were disabled without PG&E ever figuring out that they would not work in the very emergency that they were needed for. David Broward, the environmentalist who spent so much of his life in this community, once defined a nuclear reactor as a complex technological device for locating earthquake faults in California. And that it is. Wherever we build one, we discover an earthquake fault more capable than the reactor was designed to withstand. At San Onofre right now, there is an earthquake cluster, the earthquake fault cluster, which is estimated to produce ground movement larger than the reactor can withstand. At San Diablo, they've now discovered a shoreline fault, which appears capable of producing more ground motion than that reactor can withstand. So where do we stand at the moment in this crisis? San Onofre has been shut down since January. The end of January, a steam generator tube burst, releasing radioactivity, causing an emergency shutdown. A day or so later, it was revealed that the other unit of San Onofre, which had been shut down for some weeks for inspection, had found hundreds of steam generator tubes that were worn, degraded. You've got to understand that these steam generators were put in 1 and 2 years ago. They're showing wear that you would not expect to see in a reactor that is decades older. Last night, it took me an effort of almost pulling teeth to get Edison to admit that 12% of the steam generator tubes in Unit 2 and 9% of the steam generator tubes in Unit 3 have degraded in 1 and 2 years. And yet Edison wants to start those reactors up again and run them with thousands of tubes that have been damaged. The steam generator tubes are essential for safety. If they leak, highly radioactive water is put into the environment. And if they leak, you lose your primary coolant and can have a meltdown. So there is a crisis in this state. Diablo Canyon is unsafe to operate. If there were an accident, you could lose much of the Central Valley agricultural area. If the wind is blowing this way, you could all be affected where we are. San Onofre has 8.5 million people living within 50 miles. 8.5 million people. And if they are permitted to restart, those people's lives will be in grave jeopardy. So what you're trying to do here today is very important. We can return to the safe, renewable, sustainable forms of energy that sustain life on this planet for millennia until December 2nd of 1942. California, in many ways, is the Saudi Arabia of sun. And we not only can, but must make that transition. It is unclear that San Onofre will ever be able to restart, but if it can, it will not be able to run very long. The governor has the power to order the transition to the renewable forms of energy that we need. And that has to start now. Jerry Brown, when he was governor the first time, actually intervened to oppose the licensing of Diablo Canyon. But the Jerry Brown who's governor today seems to be running very far from the type of values that he tried to enunciate in his first time as governor. But you can make a change, make that alter, move us to a system that doesn't rely either on fossil fuels that warm the planet or fissile fuels that proliferate nuclear weapons and create the potential for massive radioactive release. So, in closing, let me say that what we need to do is, if you'll pardon the expression, bridge the gap between these dangerous forms of energy and the safe and sustainable energy of the sun. And it has to start now. What happened at Fukushima, an earthquake larger than the reactor was designed for, could happen today at Diablo Canyon. It could happen today at San Onofre with its spent fuel pools. And so what you're trying to do is critical, not just here in Berkeley, but to create a statewide movement once again to move us away from the atom to the sun. And if we don't do that, it seems to me very difficult for us to be able to continue to survive as a species. We cannot have a world in which there are thousands of nuclear weapons and have them not used for long periods of time. At some point, they're going to go off. And the only way to stop that, in large measure, is to stop the entire nuclear enterprise, which proliferates those weapons. So thank you, recommit yourself, and help us find a way to bridge the gap between the dangers of fossil fuels and fissile fuels and that safe and sustainable world of solar energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan Hirsch. Uh-oh, here comes another Dan. Come on out, Dan. We have Daniel Ellsberg with us today, and for the last 2 years I've had a new hero named Bradley Manning, but for the last 41 years I've had another hero who also looked to tell the American people the truth about the war in Vietnam and has been putting his body on the line against wars and nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants ever since. So please welcome my hero, Daniel Ellsberg. "50 years ago, in October of 1962, I was sleeping in the Pentagon during the overt part of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I came out of that crisis, and I spent a year or two after that studying how we got into it, and I've spent really the rest of my life keeping in touch with new information about what the risks were in that crisis, which were actually greater than we knew at the time. But even at the time, 50 years ago, I came out of that feeling, this is not a species to be trusted with nuclear weapons.
Yes.
It was not just the Americans, it was not just the Russians. There were a couple of things I didn't know at that time, some of which really were much later. Only a few years ago we learned that if the invasion forces
which were ready to go within hours of the climax of that crisis. I remember a Saturday night when we were expecting invasion to take place Tuesday morning. We now know, well, we didn't know then, that had that happened, as the president was threatening, they would have been met not by 8,000 Soviet troops and 250,000 Cubans, as they believed, but by 42,000 Soviet troops armed with tactical nuclear weapons, which they would have used against the invasion forces and killed all of them, essentially, 140,000 of them altogether, which, as McNamara said, would have resulted certainly in the use of our nuclear weapons to annihilate Cuba, all of the Russian troops and all of the Cubans, and almost certainly have sent SAC, which was in the air at that time, a third of it, toward the Soviet Union. That's how close we were. But one other thing we learned before that, but still 20 years after the crisis, a lot of people haven't learned it yet, but that was the reality of nuclear winter, which meant that if SAC had dropped its weapons on the Soviet Union, in the belief that not a single Soviet weapon would come back to the United States, which was probably true, they would have annihilated Europe with their shorter range weapons of the kind they had in Cuba, but they would have, and China, we would have annihilated. But the smoke from the burning cities would have blotted out the sunlight from our own weapons throughout the world, causing nuclear winter, a reduction which some called, well, it won't really be nuclear winter, maybe it'll be nuclear autumn, but it would last 10 years. Reducing that sunlight, killing the crops, no crops, starving everybody, and what Dan Hirsch was talking about, and Joanna Macy, and others here, all the organisms that depend on sunlight or on eating other organisms that depend on photosynthesis, depend on vegetation and sunlight, all of them would go. So the generations that the Buddha was looking forward to might indeed be following the Dharma in their way, but they would not include humans or mammals or primates or vertebrates or very much else except bacteria, as a matter of fact, and that's where we were then. So I was not mistaken to think that humans were not to be trusted with nuclear weapons. What's been clear for the 40 years or so I read here of commercial nuclear power, and what we know from 3 Mile Island, before that Browns Ferry and others, from Chernobyl, and now from Fukushima, is that this is not a species to be trusted with nuclear reactors. Even this state, even California, even here, even the people here, including me to start with, I would not trust with a nuclear reactor or a nuclear weapon. Now the people here, I remember at Diablo Canyon, I think it was the first big mass arrest, which I'm told was 77, it might have been 78. I remember being there, and we were about to, after the rally, we were about to, which was very large at that point, go over the wire into the property that they were going to build Diablo Canyon on. And there was people were going over this wire. There was I remember a black CBS cameraman with his crew who had been filming us up till that point. And he wasn't going to go over. He was filming us going over the fence, but he wasn't going in. And I said to him, you know, it would be good for everybody here if you were there, or they might treat us better when they arrest us and so forth, if it's on the camera. And anyway, you get good pictures and so on. He said, well, we can't go in there. We've been ordered. We cannot go over the wire. And I said, really? Why is that? He said, well, there is such a thing as property rights. And I said, from who do you buy the property right to contaminate the Earth's surface for 100,000 years? Or we heard tonight 500,000 years. I said, that's a hell of a right. And he looked at me and he said, yeah. And he took his crew over the wire, and they did go in. Somebody else, I can't remember whether they got arrested or not. Now, I had one other story. We were hearing about Brown, and it was at another huge rally on nuclear power somewhere in California, I forget where. Kind of rainy day, and vast crowd, one of the largest I'd ever seen. And in comes a helicopter, unannounced, with Governor Brown on it. And he was come to join the rally. He had not said so beforehand. He said, my God, where did he come from? And a lot of people were kind of anti-political at that point, like Occupy Wall Street. And they were not sure whether they wanted a politician to address them, you know, and so forth. And they said, what's he doing here? And I said, well, you get a crowd like this, and a politician comes, doesn't he? But as I was coming down from the platform and Brown was going up, somebody asked me, do you trust Governor Brown? And I said, trust is not an appropriate reaction to have toward a politician. And he said, well, what then? I said, vigilance. But he did speak then. He was a different Brown then. You have heard from others who are expert, as I am not, on this subject, plenty of reason why we should not have nuclear reactors anywhere in the world, not in California. We should not have them, and we should close them down. You've heard those reasons. The question is, will Governor Brown do what we ask him to do, to throw his weight, cast his vote on the phone and otherwise, and in public speech, use the influence he has to save this state from the fate of Fukushima, or the prospect of that? Will he do it? That's the question. Well, the answer is he, if you ask the question, is he likely to do it? No, of course not. The crowd is not the size here, right? This is not all of, even Berkeley is not out here now. He's not looking at the kind of pressure that in some ways he was earlier. So he's not likely to do it. But is it feasible? Is it imaginable? Are we asking something absurd? Well, somebody asked me earlier today whether I was an optimist or a pessimist. And I said, I'm an optimist. I think we have a chance. It's a small chance. The odds are not good. But no one can prove that it's impossible for us to get through this, to get away from what we've done, to get away with it, and to keep this all going with all the sins and all the horrors and all the torture and everything else, but all the love and all the people and the infants and the compassion. This is not a crowd, and I know a lot of you, and I've been arrested with a lot of you. This is not a crowd that's typical even of Berkeley. But it is representative of a large community around the world, which is a minority of this species. But this species does have people who don't feel that they have to conform to business as usual and count the votes and keep their prospects absolutely safe all the time. People who do care, if not about 10,000 generations like the Buddha, but 4 or 5 generations at least. And I've really lately come to think that the reality of our species is, at least currently, we don't care that much about the 3rd and 4th generation, about the great-grandchildren. And we talk about it, but we don't really act as if we care. The Indians talked about making policy for 10 generations ahead. We don't do that. Do we do it? It's the question I'm raising. Do we do it for 3 generations? Do we really care that much about our children's world? When you look at the climate problem, we're going to live into the climate problem, let alone our children and our grandchildren. But our great-grandchildren, who is acting as if they cared? Well, the people here are acting as if they care. And although we are a minority, there are a lot of us, and they are enough of us, activists here, and people who care, to get through to the Jerry Browns and the others, and urge them to do what they really can do to save our planet. Thank you.